and it's describing a war in heaven where the dragon and his angels fought back, but Satan was defeated. There's no longer any place for him in heaven, and he was thrown down to the earth.
Fall.
Okay? So this is his second fall. At the first fall, even though he was judged by God and found to be full of pride and sinful, he still had access to heaven. How do we know this? Because in the book of Job, he assembles with all of the angels before God's throne. So even though he fell originally, and he's called the prince of the power of the air, and he prowls around the earth like a lion, until the middle of this Daniel's 70th week, he still has to report to God and assemble with all the other angels up in heaven.
Wow.
He still has access to heaven today. He's our accuser. He stands there and accuses us before God day and night.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That's what it says here. Who accuses them? He's been thrown down. Who accuses them day and night before our God. So picture Satan. What's he doing right now? He's prowling around the earth like a lion, and then he's going up and he's going, you know what, God? She didn't pray this morning, and you know what? That one said a little swear, and this one over here, you wouldn't believe was she, right? The accuser. He's doing that right now. Okay? That's what he's doing. When God confronted Satan in the book of Job, he says, Satan, what you been doing? Well, I've been prowling around on the earth. Because he goes and he watches everyone and he knows our weaknesses, then he goes and he accuses us before God. Thank God we've got Jesus, the advocate, who's at the right hand of the Father, who is interceding for us, right? You've got the accuser and the advocate. So, what's going on here in chapter 12? This is what I think is going on, okay? Because it's not entirely clear. But from this description, from what I can gather, halfway through the 7 years, they say there's a big war in heaven, and Satan is cast down, and he can't go back up into heaven. I think at this point it's like, you know what, Satan?
That's it.
You're kicked out for good, and now you are restricted to the earth. That's what I think happens, and I'll tell you why I think that, okay? Because it says right here, he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. Did you catch that? No longer any place for them in heaven. I'm reading, let's just read it. I'm going to start in verse 7, okay? Revelation 12, verse 7. Okay? Now, war arose in heaven. Michael and his angels fighting against the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, but he was defeated, and there was no longer any place for them in heaven. That right there tells you that Satan still has access to heaven until this point. Okay? And the great dragon was thrown down, that ancient serpent who is called the devil and Satan, the deceiver of the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. And I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ has come. For the accuser of our brothers has been thrown down, who accuses them day and night before our God. And they have conquered him by the blood of the Lamb and by the word of their testimony, for they loved not their lives even unto death. Therefore rejoice, O heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to you, O earth and sea, for the devil has come down to you in great wrath, because he knows that his time is short.
Wow.
So the way I interpret that is the heavens are rejoicing because they got rid of that guy. They don't have to listen to him accusing all day long, right? But look out, because now he can't come back up to heaven. So now he's restricted to earth, and his wrath is great, for he knows his time is short. He has access to the scriptures the same way that we do. I can't believe he doesn't realize he's going to lose in the end, because we know that he's going to lose.
Yeah, he knows, but he just.
But he's going to put up a fight, right?
Yes.
So when is
Why?
this happening?
He
After?
doesn't-
Okay, so I'm
he
glad you
doesn't
asked
know
that.
everything. Yeah, with him.
So I gave you guys this outline of the book of Revelation, right?
Yes.
And let's do this. I wanna ask you guys a question. Based on everything that we have studied so far, I gave you a little diagram of 4 different scenarios. So let me just pull it out. It was this one,
Yes.
okay? And it had 4 different possible, and there's even more than 4, I just put the 4 most popular, scenarios. So I wanna ask you a question. Let's look at scenario 1. Now that we've gone through all of the seals and all of the trumpets, do you think that scenario 1 is possible? I want you to just look at where the seals are and where the trumpets are.
I don't think the first scenario is possible because we have the seals with the trumpet, like the 6 seals.
Yeah, so just
Seven.
compare it to what we put here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so in scenario 1, the seals, do you see Daniel's 70th week at the bottom?
Yes.
Okay, so scenario 1 has seal 6 happening like right in the middle of the 7 years. So do we think that's right? So can we just eliminate that as a possibility?
Yes.
Okay. Alright, how about scenario 2? Oh, that's got seal 6 at the end,
Yes.
Have it in the car.
and in here,
Thank you.
right? So scenario 2 maybe?
Yeah, it's a maybe,
Yeah. Alright.
Maybe.
That's a maybe.
because it's 6 and 7.
It's
All right.
just-
How about scenario 3? Does anybody else need a copy? I got an extra one here.
I need the copy. This is yours. Mine is in the car.
I think the scenario 4 is the
Me too, because it starts at the same time.
yeah
I
the
think
4
it's the last one.
It's the
yeah
last
the
one.
last one is
Okay.
correct.
You think the last one's correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, how come?
Because of the 6 and 7
They
seals.
start at
Together.
the same time.
Yes.
When Jesus returned.
Okay. Yeah, scenario 3 is tough because, scenario 3 has the 7th trumpet, it has all the trumpets happening in the first 3.5
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And we think that trumpet 7 is the return,
Yes.
Yeah.
right? So I
Yes.
would knock out scenario 3 right off the bat too, right?
6
Okay.
and 7 is in the
Right.
return.
Okay. So, let me ask you this. You guys think that scenario 4 is probably the most likely? Is that what I'm
Yeah.
hearing?
Yes.
Okay. So, we've gone through the book of Revelation, and the way it's written is we went chapters 4 and where do the trumpets start?
7.
Oh, the seals are chapter 6, the trumpets are chapter 8. So we went chapter 6 and chapter 7, whoop, all the way back chapter 8. Do you see that? Some people think that it has to go chapter 6, chapter 7, chapter 8, chapter 9, chapter 10. Do you see what I mean? But what we think is that it goes chapter 6, chapter 7, now I'm going to go back, chapter 8, chapter 9. So when we get to chapter 12, I believe that we went back again, okay? And I think we went back to halfway point.
Why? Because it says 3 and a
Let's
half.
go, let's go through and we'll see if you guys come to the same conclusion. So I'm really glad you asked that question. But we've already proven, I think, or at least our understanding of these scriptures, that it describes certain things and then it goes back. And then it describes
Because it
certain
always keeps
things and then
saying
it goes
those
back.
3 and a half, like
It
1,
is, exactly, right?
160, yeah.
We've got, it's not, okay, if we added up all the 3.5s, we'd get way more than 7 at this point in
Yeah.
Revelation, right? We got the 2 witnesses, and we got the trampling of Jerusalem, and now we've got this woman, and then we've got the Antichrist operating for 42 months, and we've got a lot of 3.5s. Obviously, you don't just keep adding them all up. Okay, so so we got to the end, and I think we've gone back in time, and I think that chapter 12, I think it starts at the midpoint, at the abomination of desolation. Okay? So, if you want, you can put on your timeline, and we'll see if this ends up making sense. I should have drawn this a lot lower. Okay. So we got the covenant, we got the AOD, we've got seals 6 and 7, we've got trumpet 7, we've got the resurrection and rapture, and this is the great trib. I think that the war in heaven, I think Satan got thrown down right there. Okay? Now, do you find that interesting? That Satan would get thrown down right at that point?
It's because they know that's when things are going to happen here.
Uh-huh.
It'll be really hard.
Yeah, okay? So we're gonna just speculate Satan thrown down. All right? And let's just see how that looks as we go through the rest of the lesson.
And he says he knows that his time is short. So
Yes,
he
it does.
know
Right?
He doesn't have a lot of time, and that's when things get really
Right.
bad.
Okay. Now, let's start with our lesson. Question 1. What does the dragon or Satan do when he's hurled to earth?
He pursued the woman
Yep.
who had given birth to the male child.
Okay.
Israel.
Which is Israel.
Yeah.
Okay. So he's pursuing the Jews, isn't he? All right. Revelation 12:14 tells us that the woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she might fly from the serpent into the wilderness to the place where she is to be nourished for a time, times, and half a time. How long is that?
3.5.
3.5 years. So where would we put the woman being nourished? On our timeline.
In the middle.
That's my text.
Wow, it was a sound
It's the
effect.
text of doom. So here's the Great Tribulation. We also had the 2 witnesses. We had,
The one.
what else did we have here? The War on Saints. And so where is the woman nourished?
Question mark.
Well,
Yeah,
how
I
long is
wasn't
she
sure.
nourished for?
3.5.
3.5 years.
Yes.
So we've got 2 choices. Here
No.
or here, right? Okay.
Second one.
By the way, I suppose that we could divide it and like make a new 3.5. You know what I mean? Like we could probably put any of these things anywhere, but it just, based on especially Jesus' description, everything seems to fit over here.
I don't
So-
understand that woman not nourished.
Okay, so picture this. What does the dragon do when he gets thrown down? Satan.
He calls himself God.
Okay, but what does Satan do according to our scriptures? He pursues
He
the
wants,
woman.
yeah, he pursues.
And God supernaturally protects
Yes,
her for how long?
for 3.5.
3.5 years.
Oh.
That means that Satan would get thrown down right here, and the one and
that's
the woman would be protected.
144,000
Oh, okay.
tribes. Are they gonna get
That means
protected?
it's yeah,
well,
it's-
so that's speculation. So, but this first, what we've just encountered is our first justification for saying that the war in heaven happens and Satan gets thrown down right here, because the woman's nourished for 3.5 years, right?
yeah.
He gets thrown down, he is mad. And the first thing he does, now, can you think of a time in history when Satan went after the Jews?
Oh boy.
A lot, right?
Yeah.
Egypt,
Egypt.
when they had to throw all the babies in the Nile, all the male children. Herod, when he slaughtered all the babies under, boys under 2 years old. I mean, time and time and time again, the Jews have been persecuted. This is just one more in a long line. The Holocaust in our,
Yeah.
right?
In our time.
In modern times. So Satan is behind it all. And so he's thrown down, and the first thing he does is he initiates this huge persecution of the Jews. And we've got this woman who is nourished supernaturally by God in the wilderness for 3.5 years. Now, I don't think that the entire nation of Israel could flee to the wilderness and be nourished by God. As I read this in the lesson, I'm like, boy, it sounds unrealistic, but God can do anything. So maybe that was the wrong choice of words. But I wonder if the 144,000 are the representatives of Israel, right? Because it's 12,000 from each of the 12 tribes,
Oh.
right? So that's representative of the entire nation of Israel. And they're found to be righteous. We know that from chapter 14, which we'll get to. So I wonder if God calls them into the wilderness, and it's the 144,000 that are protected and supernaturally protected by him during the entire Great Tribulation. Now, I'll tell you something that I found to be very interesting. Okay? Are you ready for this?
No.
You guys are so smart. I'm going to give this to you. The Church of Philadelphia. Okay? Listen to what Jesus says to the Church of Philadelphia. Because you've kept my word about patient endurance, I will keep you from the hour of trial that is coming on the whole world, to try those who dwell on the earth. Okay? So he's protecting them from the hour of trial. And he says, the one who conquers, I will make him a pillar in the temple of my God. Never shall he go out of it, and I will write on him the name of my God and my own new name. That's Philadelphia. Now listen to the 144,000. Then I looked, and behold, on Mount Zion stood the Lamb, and with him 144,000 who had his name and his father's name written on their foreheads.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. The same promise that Jesus gave to Philadelphia, I'll write my names on your forehead, is how they're described. Now, Jesus gave each of the 7 churches a different promise. Not every, so on one of them it was each of the tree of life, on a different one it was, I'll give him the morning star, and a different one it was something about you can sit on my throne. So don't you find that interesting?
Yeah.
So here we've got these 144,000 that have his name and the Father's name, or the Father and Jesus' name written on their forehead. And Philadelphia has that same promise, and Philadelphia was told, I'm going to keep you from the hour of trial. So that's another reason why I think maybe the woman who went into the wilderness is the 144,000. Right?
Yeah.
Maybe.
So is the Philadelphia part of the 144?
I don't know. I don't
That's
know.
the church.
That's the church. I
It's
know.
the
And these are
Christians,
Jews. These are
not
bloodline Jews.
Yeah.
So we
Confusing.
hope there'll be some non-bloodline Jews that will be protected too then.
Well, I think there will be for sure. I think there's
Yeah.
going to be people who are murdered, and it's just like today.
Yeah.
Today, there are people being killed for their faith as we
Yeah.
speak, and yet there are other people who are being absolutely supernaturally protected.
Yes.
I think it's going to be the same.
And those who can endure what.
Exactly. Exactly. Right? Okay, so that was a little extra tidbit for you guys. Okay, so we're on C. God supernaturally protects the woman who's being pursued by the dragon, and this enrages the dragon. So what does he do next? And who do you think this refers to?
The dragon?
Yeah, so he got thrown out of heaven.
Uh-huh.
He gets really mad. He goes after the Jews, and we don't know if it's 144,000, but they go off into the wilderness, and they're supernaturally protected by God. We didn't ask a question about this, but he pours all this water out of his mouth, and then the earth opens up and swallows all the water so that they're not destroyed. And it says, then the dragon became furious with the woman. And what did he do next?
Bring them into the offspring.
Yes. Yes. So he went off to make war with the rest of her offspring. Who is that?
The believers.
The ones who kept God's commandments.
Yes. And
You hold fast their
And the
testimony.
witnesses of Jesus.
yeah.
So
So the-
believers.
Right. So I think that it's the rest of the Jews, because I don't think every Jew on earth was put into the wilderness, right, and supernaturally protected. So I think it's Christians. It's those who are holding to the testimony of Jesus.
Yeah.
So clearly he turns his wrath on Christians.
Yeah.
But I think he also is still persecuting the rest of the Jews as well. Okay?
So just everybody that believes.
People of the book. It's people whose names are written in the Lamb's Book of Life. And the Jews have not yet accepted Jesus
Yeah.
because he hasn't yet come back, but they will. Because that's God's plan, is to save them. Alright? Okay. So, question 2. Are you guys all good with this? We all good? Okay. Question 2. We're only on question 2.
But this is
Mine.
the hardest part
It
of
is.
this.
Oh, wait until the next lesson.
I almost gave up like, oh,
Keep going. You think this is bad?
the
Okay.
beginning of this lesson is the hardest.
Okay. In Revelation 13, 1 and 2, John sees a beast coming out of the sea. In a previous lesson, we compared this beast from the sea with 4 individual beasts of Daniel chapter 7. According to Revelation 13:2, who gave the beast his power, his throne, and great authority?
The
The dragon. In verse 3, the whole world was astonished and followed the beast. Why?
Because his wound was healed.
His mortal wound. So if you have a mortal wound, you're dying, right?
Yeah.
Actually, you've died. A mortal wound means you've been killed to death. Okay, but it has been healed.
So it was a miracle.
Yeah. By following the beast, who were men worshiping?
Satan.
Satan.
Satan
Okay.
himself.
For how long is this beast given authority?
42 months.
Oh man, which is 3.5 years. So
I find so interesting how they say, instead of saying 3.5, they go 42 months, 1260 days.
Yeah, a time times and half a time,
Yes.
right? In the middle of the 7. There's 4 different ways. Now, do you guys see why some commentators say there is no 7-year tribulation? Everything's 3.5, 3.5, 3.5,
Yeah.
3.5, right? Okay, so where
So
are we
it
gonna
is
put?
3.5. It's
It
not. It's not
Well,
7.
It's
It's 7 total.
It's 7
from the
total,
beginning.
but the
tribulation.
3.5 is really the number that we really have to pay attention to. So
Yeah.
what we could put here if we wanted was
So not
beast
as bad.
given authority. This is where the Antichrist is given authority. Now, isn't that completely consistent with the book of Daniel, where the saints are given into his hand for a time, times, and half a time? Right? Same thing, okay? And then we saw in chapter 11, I don't know if you guys remember this, but they will trample the holy city for 42 months. The Gentiles will trample the holy city for 42 months. There's another 3.5.
Yeah.
So over and over and over again. Okay. Now, compare the language of Revelation 13, oh, this was the next question, to Daniel 7. To what time frame does this apply? This second
3.5
3.5, right? The Great
second.
Tribulation. Okay. Who is this beast and who will worship him?
The inhabitants of the earth.
It's Satan.
Satan.
Okay, is Satan this beast that's coming out of the sea? So I thought Satan was the dragon that got thrown down out of heaven. And also, I thought that the dragon gave his power to this beast.
So dragon
Antichrist.
is Satan, and the beast is the Antichrist.
Antichrist.
There you go.
Is the Antichrist.
There you go.
Yeah.
Exactly.
It's the man who's going to be
Exactly.
used by Satan
Yes.
Exactly.
to.
C'est robot.
Okay, so that's really,
Oh,
really
it's a
important for you guys to understand.
Me too, oh my God.
Satan is the dragon. He will
Yeah.
always be the dragon. This
big
beast
con
that's being
man.
described is
Yeah.
the man called Antichrist. And a long time ago, you had said, I wonder if Satan possesses.
Yeah.
And I think this is where he gets possessed. I think when Satan gets thrown out of heaven, he needs a new place to live. Why not in the body of the Antichrist, right? Right?
I get goosebumps.
So I personally think that's what's going on. Okay. So, read verses 9 and 10. Where have you heard that before? Let me read these verses.
There was one.
All right. If anyone has an ear, let him hear. If anyone is to be taken captive, to captivity he goes. If anyone is to be slain with the sword he must be slain. Here is a call for the endurance and faith of the saints. Where have we heard that before? Any of that?
At the church?
Yeah. To every letter, to every church.
Yeah.
He who has an ear, let him hear, right?
Wow.
And to the
Amazing.
church in Smyrna, he said, some of you are going to be thrown in prison.
It's bad.
Be faithful unto death. And what does he say here? If anyone's to be taken captive, to captivity he will go. And if anyone's to be slain with the sword, he's going to get killed. Here's the
Wow.
endurance of the faith. So it's just a repetition of what we've already heard before, right?
Mhm.
Okay. The next beast that John sees comes out of the earth. Revelation 13:11 says that this beast has 2 horns like a lamb, but spoke like a dragon, meaning that he seems innocent, but he speaks words of the devil. This beast is identified in Revelation 19:20 as the false prophet. Who does the false prophet require people to worship?
The first beast.
The first beast, who is
Babylon.
the Antichrist.
Right.
All right, so now we've got a false prophet who's pointing at the Antichrist saying, hey, everybody, you got to worship him. Okay? All right.
My gosh.
This is, and by the way, he's saying that you should worship this beast whose wound was healed, right? His fatal wound was healed. So this is the second time we've heard of a fatal wound being healed. Okay? If one has a fatal wound, they're as good as dead. Do you see the parallels to Jesus, who died and rose again? Right? Given this, and remembering that the Antichrist will set himself up in the temple of God, claiming to be God, who does the false prophet most likely say that the Antichrist is? Yeah. Do you remember what Jesus said? What will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age?
People saying that
Do not be
False
deceived.
prophet.
Do not be, exactly, there will be false Christs and false prophets that will arise, right? So how much you want to bet the false prophet is going, here's your Messiah!
Oh.
He's raised from the dead!
To the Jewish people,
Right?
we're still waiting for the Messiah.
Right? Or to the Christians who are waiting for the second coming, because what does
Exactly.
Jesus say?
Yeah.
Don't be deceived. If they say he's in an inner room over there,
Yeah.
don't believe it.
Because I'm
Right?
coming on a cloud.
Exactly. This is why it's so important that when we see Jesus, that we see him in the clouds, not in an inner room or not in the wilderness. Do you realize that? Those were the
There's
two
so many
places that Jesus
antichrists,
warns.
So many false messiahs.
But listen to this, guys. Where does the woman is being nourished in the wilderness, right? Listen to what Jesus says. So if they say to you, look, he's in the wilderness, don't go out. If they say, look, he's in the inner rooms, don't believe it. There's a reason he chose those 2 locations to say that and to warn people. He's got to come in the clouds. Okay. So, Satan is a great imitator who always wanted to be like God. Can you identify his false trinity?
Dragon to beast.
Okay, so let's draw the Holy Trinity. All right, we'll get rid of this for a minute. You've seen enough of that for a while, right? Okay.
Ano, igual fica. Fica fazendo esse barulho mesmo.
Okay. Everybody, right? That's a good picture of the Trinity, right?
Yes, yes.
Okay. So what is Satan's false Trinity? What does it look like?
Satan
Satan where?
on the top.
On the top, right? Because Satan even wants to be God, or he
Oh,
wants
yeah.
to elevate himself.
The Antichrist.
Antichrist,
Is the whole top.
because he's the man,
Yeah.
right? And he
And-
gives all authority, just as God gave all authority to Jesus, Satan is giving all of his authority to the Antichrist.
And the other one that will claim
The
that
false.
the
Yep.
false prophet,
And
yes.
there's the false prophet. And you know that the role of the Holy Spirit is to convict people and to have people remember the scriptures and to point to Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And here's, so can you believe what a huge deceiver Satan
Oh,
is?
so
Okay.
okay. Okay. I thought the Antichrist was the false prophet.
No.
So there's gonna be a false prophet.
Yes, there is.
In addition to the Antichrist.
The
Yes.
Antichrist
Yes.
is just like Jesus.
Yes.
Wow.
You see it?
Is Christ too.
Okay. Everybody got that picture? Because that's an important one. All right.
I don't like this picture.
No. but how are we going to know? If we
It's
know the
terrifying.
truth, we'll be able to spot the lie, right?
Yes.
Yeah, yes.
And what did Jesus say? The first thing that he said when the disciples said, "What will be the sign of your coming?" He didn't say, "The signs are as follows." He said, "Don't be deceived. Don't be led astray." This is why. Because all of this deceit is going to surround the time right before his second coming.
And will be
Right?
strong.
Yes, here's the perseverance of the
Yes.
saints. He who endures to the end will be
Yes.
saved. Over and over again. Do you guys see how consistent it's all there and it's all consistent, right? So super important. So if anybody ever comes up to you and says, "Oh, we don't need to know about the end times. No one knows the day or the hour." Would you agree?
No,
No. We gotta know. We have to know because we do not want to fall under this deception. We have to know the truth. It's really important.
And the reminder is so
Yeah.
it's so important.
Yes.
And we pray, please God, let me be strong at that time, you know?
Pray that we're Philadelphians and not Smyrnans, right? Yeah.
Or that we'll endure.
That we will endure. That's the thing. We have to. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. Wasn't that Paul said, "I ran the race that God set before me," and you just got to keep your eyes fixed on the author of your faith. Okay, question 6. Revelation 13:15-18 tells us that the false prophet requires people to do 2 things. Worship the image of the beast and take the mark of the beast in either your hand, your right hand, or your forehead. So what are the consequences for not worshiping the image of the beast? To be killed. Okay. Isn't that interesting? Because God doesn't want, like, idol worship is it's the thing he doesn't want us to do. And yet idol worship is what would be required of people in the end times. What are the consequences for not taking the mark? You cannot buy or sell. So really, you're stuck, right? Those seem like heavy prices to pay, but according to Revelation 14:9-11, what are the consequences for those who do worship the beast and take his mark?
They will drink the wine of God's wrath, poured full strength into the cup of his anger, tormented forever with fire sulfur.
I don't know about you, but poured full strength just got me.
Oh.
I'm like, God's wrath is one thing, but his fury, full strength, right? And he warns people over and over and over again. There's so many warnings. Okay, the 144,000 and the 3 angels. Now this whole section is a setup for the next lesson, but it's really important that you understand the concept, okay? Israel plays a pivotal role in the end times in the ushering in of God's kingdom on earth. So recall from lesson 1 that God promised the nation of Israel blessings for obedience and curses for disobedience. Throughout history, Israel has rebelled against God's laws. Daniel summarized the disobedience of Israel in the Old Testament era in Daniel 9:3-15. If you ever want to see, just in this short passage, a summary of how God repeatedly warned his people and reached out to his people, and they did not listen, and they disobeyed, and they did not listen to the voice of God. The whole Old Testament is full of Israel's rebellion and disobedience, right? As a whole, there were certainly righteous people within the nation of Israel, but as a whole, they were disobedient. Now we get to the crucifixion. And Peter in his sermon in Acts says, you were the ones shouting, "Crucify him," right? So there's the ultimate act of disobedience, rejecting God's son. And then, after his crucifixion, if you guys have studied the book of Acts, it's unbelievable. The Jews kept attacking
It was
Paul and Peter,
amazing.
wasn't it?
It was amazing to read Acts now. You were so
Yeah.
right.
And it's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize, but their rebellion continues and
Oh, yeah.
continues and continues.
And Paul would say, and he came for you. You don't want him? Okay. You know,
And they
like,
would
oh my
stone
God.
him, and they would, like, they chased him from town to town, and it's really incredible when you read, I don't know if you got a chance to read these passages, but it really,
I
It's
did.
crazy.
You know how it's a good technique when I drive? I put an audio.
Yeah,
oh, it's good,
And
yeah.
it goes so fast.
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's like a story.
Mhm.
And the guy that reads, it's always like, whoa.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
Yeah,
all new.
it's easy to listen to,
yes.
isn't it? Yeah.
It's like, this is
Book
too
of
much to
Acts is
listen.
also.
So this whole thing was just to say that throughout history, from the Old Testament right up through the New, the Jews have been disobedient against God. But God always preserves an obedient remnant to enable restoration. And I think that these 144,000 might represent that obedient remnant. Okay? Okay. So Paul in the book of Romans addresses the rebellion, the hardening, and the future restoration of Israel. In Romans chapters 9 through 11, it's worth a read. It's really fascinating. But here's how it's summarized. First, Paul talks about the rebellion and disobedience of Israel. He says, but of Israel, God says, all day long I've held out my hands to a disobedient and contrary people. So what are the consequences of that when your heart gets that hardened, okay? Israel failed to obtain what it was seeking. The elect obtained it, but the rest were hardened. So this is the same thing as Pharaoh's heart, right? If you keep sinning, your heart is going to be hardened. And it's going to be easier to sin and harder to repent and harder to turn toward God, right? So Israel, if you think about how long they've been rebelling against God, finally God gave them over to their rebellion and said, your hearts are hardened. But he promised them in the Old Testament that he would restore them. He promised. So he has to. He's good as his word, right? He promised in Ezekiel and in Jeremiah that he would put a new spirit in their heart, that he would replace their heart of stone with a heart of flesh. So, what Paul talks about in as the future restoration, a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. And in this way, all Israel will be saved. As it is written, the deliverer will come from Zion. He will banish ungodliness from Jacob. And this will be my covenant with them when I take away their sins. Okay? Any questions?
So all the Jewish people will be saved at the end.
I think it's all who are alive at the time of his coming.
Okay.
Because-
the ones that die now, they without Christ. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there are Messianic Jews, so,
Yeah, there are.
but yes, and it's just like in the Old Testament. If they died in faith, Abraham died in faith, Moses died in faith, there were lots of Old Testament Jews who died in faith, right?
Okay.
Well, Moses was before Abraham, but anyway. But even before Israel, Noah, I mean, the Hall of Faith, read Hebrews 11, right? Anybody mentioned there, all the prophets, right? There were lots of faithful people who died in the Old Testament, and they will be resurrected as part of the righteous. So nothing has changed. You're either full of faith or you're not, right? So
So the ones alive.
I think
at
it's
that
the ones who
time.
are alive at the time, because once you've died,
Yeah.
if you didn't have faith during your life, I don't think there's a second chance. That applies to everybody, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Even today? Even for Gentiles, it's the same thing, right? So,
It's just I think some people believe that all Jews are gonna be saved.
I think they might too.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay, so, and this is just me, but it says, a partial hardening has come upon Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. I think that God has a number of Gentiles, and that when that last one gets saved, that's when stuff happens. That's when Jesus comes back. but I don't know. All right, let's keep going because we're running behind. So we read Revelation 14, which describes could describe the obedient remnant that will enable the full restoration of Israel. This is the 144,000, which represents the entire nation of Israel. They're standing with Jesus on Mount Zion. They've been redeemed from mankind as first fruits for God and the Lamb, so they are absolutely righteous. And note that they're called first fruits. When you're a first fruit, that means there's more to follow behind you. So if they have been redeemed and they represent the nation of Israel, then the rest of Israel will follow. Right? Okay. When Jesus comes to save them. Okay. So here we go. Now John describes the action of 3 angels flying in mid-heaven. The first angel, by the way, who's carrying the eternal gospel, right? So when a lot of people say, oh, the gospel has to be preached in the whole world and then the end will come, right? Didn't Jesus say that?
Yeah.
Could it be possible that God accomplishes this through this angel? Maybe, right? Because this angel is, I saw another angel flying directly overhead with the eternal gospel to proclaim to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation and tribe and language and people.
Oh, wow.
Right? So I'm just saying that if man doesn't accomplish it first, God can accomplish it.
Wow.
Okay? Just saying. Okay. Because a lot of people are like, oh, Jesus won't come back until, or the end won't come until man has reached all these nations. But I actually think that God can accomplish it through his own means too.
It's not that man can, but the gospel can reach.
The gospel
The
can be
angel
preached. Exactly.
or the man.
Exactly. So, okay. So the first angel says, fear God and give him glory, for the hour of his judgment has come. The second angel says, fallen, fallen is Babylon the Great. And the third angel says, if anyone worships the beast in its image and receives a mark on his forehead or his hand, he will also drink the wine of God's wrath and will be tormented with fire and sulfur forever and ever. These angelic messages seem to present a moment of decision, comparing those who worship God to those who choose to worship the beast. While it's clear that those who worship the beast will suffer eternal torment and damnation, what does John say about the saints? Yeah. They rest from their labors.
Oh, I put blessed are the dead who die in the Lord.
Yes.
From now on, blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds follow them.
Yes.
Put the whole thing, and I'm lazy.
But do you see the two contrasts? So even if you die, you are blessed.
Yeah.
Blessed are the dead who die in the Lord.
Wow.
Lord, okay? Okay, now we've got these 2 harvests. That's up next. So we gave you the 2 passages from Revelation, but first we're going to go back and we're going to look at the parable of the wheat and the tares. Some translations call it the wheat and the weeds. Okay? So the parable of the wheat and the tares in the book of Matthew helps us to understand the harvests of Revelation 14. So as you read the parable of the wheat and the tares, how long were the wheat and the tares allowed to grow together?
I will put it down until the harvest.
Until the harvest. So the servants come in and say, Master, all these weeds are growing up. You want us to pluck them out now? And he goes, no, no, let them grow together until the harvest. Okay. Where does each go?
The weeds will burn.
Mm-hmm.
The weeds go into the barn.
Okay. Now, one of the things that I noticed, there's a whole imagery around gathering. The resurrection and the rapture, they're gathered to the Lord, right? Well, there's also a gathering of the wicked going on here, because the weeds or the tares are gathered into bundles to be burned. So picture that. This gathering has to happen, then they're going to be burned. Okay? Okay. So the explanation of the parable, when does the harvest take place?
The end of the age.
Okay. Do you see how this is yet another nail in the coffin of the pre-trib rapture?
Yeah.
Because they have to grow together until the end of the age. You can't pluck up the wheat and put it in the barn
Wow.
before the harvest, right? I just-
The
I-
confirmation.
It's, yeah, everywhere that we've studied, doesn't it? It really, it's the truth of Scripture. Okay.
Yeah.
So at that time, at the end of the age, what happens to the righteous? According to verse 43.
Shine like the sun
In the
in the
kingdom.
kingdom of their Father.
And what's gonna, when we have glorified bodies, I believe we will be shiny. We will-
And pretty.
Well, I gotta tell you, when Jesus comes back, he's coming back in the glory of the Father. And the New Jerusalem won't even need the sun because the Father is going to be the source of light and the Lamb will be his lamp. So
Wow.
I think there's a case for us being a little bit shiny in our resurrected bodies. Who knows? Okay. So now let's go back to these two harvests that are written about in Revelation 14, and we're going to consider the second harvest first. So in John 15:1, Jesus calls himself the true vine. But what vine are the grapes in this second harvest in Revelation growing from? The vine of the
Of
earth.
the earth. Yeah.
Do you guys remember those who dwell on the earth? Would those be righteous or unrighteous? Unrighteous, those who dwell on the earth. So now we see this vine of the earth. Where are these grapes thrown?
Wine press of the
Yeah.
wrath of God.
So we know for sure that they're unrighteous because they are thrown into the great winepress of the wrath of God. So which group does this equate to in the parable of the wheat and the tares? They're the tares or the weeds, right? The wicked. In the parable, they're called the sons of the devil. The devil came and sowed all those weeds. Okay? Now let's review the description of the other harvest. Which group does this equate to in the parable of the wheat and the tares?
The wheat.
The wheat. They're gathered into into God's barn. Right? If I go there, I will prepare a place for you and I'll come back and get you, right? Recall that the wheat was taken into the barn. What event might this harvest be depicting?
The rapture.
The resurrection and rapture. So as we go back through our outline of the book of Revelation, it appears as though the way it's written is we've got this introduction and we've got seals 1 through 6, and then seal 6 is the great day of his wrath has come. That's what they're saying during seal 6. Then we've got the 7 trumpets, and at the 7th trumpet, it says, the nations raged, but your wrath came. Right? But we also know at the 7th trumpet, we've got the resurrection of the righteous. Right? Then this third section, this cosmic battle of good and evil, we just ended with these two harvests. And that second harvest, they're thrown into the winepress of God's wrath. So 3 different times we have encountered God's wrath, have we not? Okay, so wouldn't you say that the way the book of Revelation is written is if we've got our 7 years, and here's our great trib and all of the stuff that happens during the 3.5 years, we studied the seals and it ended in God's wrath, and we studied the trumpets and it ended in God's wrath, and we just went through this whole cosmic, here's the Antichrist and here's the false prophet and Satan was thrown down and right, and the 2 harvests, and it ended in God's wrath. So you can see, I believe that the structure of the book of Revelation is, I'm telling you this piece, now I'm going to go back, and I'm going to tell you again, and then I'm going to go back, and I'm going to tell you again. Now, is this unusual for Scripture? Is this the first time we've ever?
Yes, at the scripture.
Confirmation. Or did
It
that?
sure does. Jesus did the exact same thing, did he not? He said to the disciples said, what will be the sign of your coming in the end of the age? And he goes, well, there's going to be wars and rumors of wars. There's going to be famines and earthquakes and beginning of earth pangs. There's going to be tribulation and persecution. And he who endures to the end will be saved. Now, let me go back. When you see the abomination of desolation, do you see what he did? Jesus went all the way to the end, and then he went back. How about the book of Daniel? The statue vision. Got all the way to the return of Jesus, didn't it? The rock strikes the statue's feet. Jesus' second coming. Then he has another vision. Whoop! I got 4 beasts. The beast was killed by Jesus, and I got Son of Man coming on the clouds. Oh, now here's another vision. Whoop! I'm going to go through, and then the little horn is killed. Whoop! And I got another vision, right? So this is not unusual. This is a structure that we have seen over and over again in Scripture. So that's I rest my case.
He wants to make sure we know.
Exactly.
We understand. There's no excuses.
So, yeah, do you guys have any questions?
Do you have this paper extra?
Yeah, sure.
Or maybe 2?
Yep. So, are you guys confused at this point?
No.
No?
It's a lot of information.
Everybody good?
Yeah.
Because the next lesson's really confusing.